Look alive, Greg. All right. Well, this was a very instant reshuffling of agenda. Everything was running late, and now we're had to push it back. So one of our panelists is not here yet. Jonas from Optimism did not make it because I told him we're running late. Never mind. These things happen. We're moving on. The quick background of why I picked this title, I think, and then we're going to go into intros. One of the main issues that I find has been happening a lot is we chat so much about public goods. It is now kind of lost all meaning and real gravitas to a certain extent, because we keep talking about it on Twitter, but the reality of it is that still not enough funding, genuine funding goes to it. We still don't know what the fuck it actually means. For a lot of people, it means this. For others, it means that. How we measure it, how we evaluate it, how we think about it is still a complete mystery for most of us. And so I think I casted on Farcaster something like, maybe we should just call them public bads and make them a vice. Maybe then people will actually spend money on it, like legitimately a lot of money. So this is how this came to be, and then I pulled this glorious lineup together. Again, Jonas Lane is filling in, but Jonas, if he turns up,
he's welcome to replace me when he shows up.
We're we'll sort it out. And then I pulled this lineup together because I think it's really, really interesting how we all have our individual take on this based on experience and also kind of thoughts on what it should be and how it should evolve. So I'm going to introduce, everybody can introduce themselves. I'm Simona. I do a lot of just strategy, governance strategy stuff. I advise a lot of people. Public goods has been something that I just general aficionado of public goods, maybe public bads. Let's see if we do a rebrand in this panel. And Greg, who are you?
I am.
Who are you?
He's back.
Still thinking about that one. My name is Greg. I'm co-founder and CPO at Chainsafe.
Sky.
I'm Sky. I'm a longtime DAO contributor, a whole bunch of different DAOs, and helped launch a project called Public Nouns, which is funding experiments in the public goods space.
My name is Trent. I work at the Ethereum Foundation, but I am a member of the Protocol Guild, which is a collective of core Ethereum contributors.
I'm Lane. For the past few years, I've been building a layer 1 called Space Mesh, which launched recently. Used to be with the Ethereum Foundation and tried to build something like Protocol Guild a few years earlier and failed miserably, which we just spoke about on the other stage. So it's really exciting to see this is actually finally happening now.
Cool. So thanks, everybody. First things first, what do we feel is terribly broken right now with the way we think about public goods and how we relate to them? Because one of the conversations, and I've had this conversation with you all and with several other people, I don't think we understand how to relate to public goods. For pretty much what we see in the real world, we pay taxes, there's an anonymous and amorphous administrative body that then decides what should get funded, when, how much, with what sense of urgency and so on. We don't really bother about it unless there is a gigantic hole in this road and you're like, what the fuck, public goods, where's my public good? So what do we think is the main issue with how we're relating to public goods? Who wants to take that?
Yeah, real quick to Simona's framing of this. Part of the problem is the definition of public goods is unknown and very, very broad. To Denison's just point, and Protocol Guild and things getting important things in the space funded, whether they're public goods or whether they're creating value, whether they're the true definition of what a public good is, I don't think matters that much. We don't want to fund scams, and we don't want to fund people that aren't doing things, but if you're creating value or you can create value, I think we want to fund those things. And so finding new ways to do that, I'm okay with that, and the term public goods is being used across the space very widely, but I think that's okay for now, and it will get refined over time. But understanding the definition is part of the problem, I think.
How do we, yeah.
So I think it's not okay that the definition is amorphous. So basically, at the start of, let's say, the Ethereum community, and the people that were trying to get funding for these, let's say, general welfare, collective welfare projects, we've started with a very general definition, and kind of everyone's accepted this unspecific terminology, and now we're sort of dealing with that, and that's why we're on this panel today. So I think it actually is important to be more specific and more intentional about how we define what public goods are, or even what common goods are, because public goods are like even higher up the stack, and oftentimes what we're funding are not public goods. And to Simona's point, when you see a pothole, it's very clear that there was a failure somewhere, but with digital infrastructure, it's a lot harder to figure out where the funding failed. It's not as tangible, and I think one of the ways we can maybe avoid these negative outcomes is being more intentional and more specific about the terminology we use.
So super briefly, I think, look, in the analog world, there's roughly, I mean, slight simplification, but there's roughly two ways things get funded. There's a public model and a private model, right? Public model, we pay taxes, the government comes in and fills in those potholes, maintains the infrastructure, and then of course we all know how the private model works. Web 2 kind of changed things a little bit. Like it inured us to like getting things for free. Like we just got used to our email being free and our doc being free and our messengers being free and everything, except they're not actually free. Because you're actually selling your data without realizing it. And all of a sudden we find ourselves in this Web3 world where like that business model doesn't work, nor do the like traditional public or private business models work. And so we have this like weird immature relationship with public goods where we still kind of expect to get them for free, but like we don't want to pay taxes, and the private model doesn't work super well, and the Web2 model doesn't work super well. So that's why we're stuck.
I think also one of the issues that like I see and face is that because a lot of the public goods are built around a lot of the public goods are like are built around like DAOs that have DeFi products that are then like purely revenue chasing. The majority of the people that participate in them are also revenue chasing. So then when any small type of contribution that can happen to whatever they're built that ecosystem is significantly overshadowed by just anybody else in there because the technical contributions are impossible to gauge. And that's like what I see day to day as a big problem. And how do you determine what to do there?
I saw this acutely as a core developer. Like developers resent the fact that like the people who get all the attention are the ones who make the noise and the ones who do the talks and the ones who are like investors get a lot of attention, and very often it's hard to see the value of the technical contribution.
But isn't the argument, though, and this is you and I were talking about this, isn't the argument that actually the technical contribution is easier to map out or like to track? How do you measure something like the vibes in the community building and so on? Like that's a
the problem is
argument.
when most people try to measure technical contribution, they end up doing things like counting lines of code or like commits, which is a terrible way because they're not all lines of code are created equal, right?
Right. So
yeah, but like I think on the I just don't want to like name names. On the flip side, like the real issue here is it's not how you value the contribution. It's that the minute that there's something to critique in the contribution, that now becomes a 90% mark down on what the person should receive. And that's because it's very difficult to, like, for example, there's like a DAO I participate in. I do technical like frameworking for it and set up like the execution of proposals, right? So I'm on the execution of proposal side, making sure that's all vetted. When it came time to go and distribute out to all the contributors, both like not technical and non-technical, all the technical people were immediately told by the like keyboard warriors of the DAO that we should not get what we were considered, and we were marked down to like 5,000 worth of this token that is worthless, $5,000 of this like worthless token, to then like justify for like a year and a half of work, and while then like they were trying to justify like the other people who had written some Excel sheets to do some math is for one proposal we're getting like 5x. And I think that's like where the real drawdown is. It's the negatives. Any bit of negativity you can draw into somebody who offers technical contributions, it becomes the scapegoat for everybody else to use as to why they shouldn't get anything.
Yeah, I guess maybe we could hope that Jonas shows up and we can roast him in person. But this is one of the challenges with the RPG.
It's being recorded, so
Perfect.
you know.
Jonas.
We love you, Jonas.
Hello.
I love you. Yeah, this is one of the challenges, and yeah, I've talked to him about this. The expectation of who's doing the evaluation it's a very high burden, and oftentimes the people who are expected to do this, especially so in the RPGF model, badge holders, I think there were over 1,000 projects that applied to the last round. You have to be able to filter through that, and once you actually get past that filtering stage, there's this assumption that these individuals have enough domain context or expert knowledge, or at least some familiarity with the projects to say this project should receive this percent, this one this percent, and that's a really high bar or high expectation for people to do. And I know they have, it's an experiment. I will grant them that, and I'm happy to see that people are trying new things. But like you said, there's often a really big gap between the work that people are doing and the ability of others to actually recognize the value of that. And I expect that this will be a significant challenge for Optimism, the RPGF program. I have a lot of reservations about it, basically.
Is this not an issue for Protocol Guild, actually? Like, how do you guys handle it?
So for Protocol Guild, we sidestep a lot of this by not evaluating contributions on a granular basis. Membership is just based on, you have a threshold of 6 months. So if you've been around 6 months, if you are contributing to a list of projects, and that's it. Basically, you're added to the membership as long as you're continuing to do this work. And your membership is weighted according to the time that you've been doing the work. So there's no way to game this other than just starting as early as possible. So this is a great outcome because then we get people contributing to the core Ethereum protocol as soon as possible and sticking around long term. We do have a vesting component, but it's also retroactive in that the earlier you start, the greater your ultimate weight is in the set. So in that way, we avoid this. It's really hard to game, and I would even say it's like impossible to game this because if you do succeed in gaming it, it's a beneficial outcome. Yeah.
Has Protocol Guild used the process to remove any people from getting streams, and is it self like? Yeah, do you self flag? I'm not going to contribute anymore, or has anyone ever been like, that person is not contributing, and we need to cut them off?
Yeah. So the big caveat is like core protocol development is a very high trust relationships with a lot of these people. You are in a highly technical field. It's a very deep domain, and people have, like I said, a really high trust for the other individuals. So there's this expectation with membership that if you do stop working on something, you will remove yourself from the set. And so far, that's worked out well. With the pilot, it's a relatively low amount of money, like $10 to $15 million vested over a year. In the future, with significant money, that might be a challenge, but so far the self-curation model has worked out pretty well.
That's a really interesting dynamic because I think the big difference between Protocol Guild and, as you mentioned, Optimism and what they're trying to do is the sheer amount and variety of projects coming in makes this evaluation problem a problem because to your point, number one, there's a lot of projects, but there's also a lot of badge holders. And everybody, like I said in the beginning, has a different idea of what is valuable or what should be funded with how much. So right now, and this is something that I know to a reasonably intimate degree because I'm advising on this process for them, it's very, very difficult to get people to agree on a baseline of evaluation. And maybe this is something that is needed. And what I'm calling common reality is that we're all talking about the same thing, and at least there's a baseline that we all agree on that constitutes value, and then you can add your personal, let's say, expertise or personal knowledge or personal thoughts on the value and on the amounts that should be delivered.
Yeah. I think in general, everyone agrees that giving out money to things that will create value, whether those are public goods or other projects, is hard. We have systems now where we have a bunch of different ways to do it, and then I put this evaluation into like optimization. Like, so it's not being optimized at all right now. We're getting good at it. So like in public nouns case, the plan was fund experiments in the public goods space. That's really broad. We don't know what's good and what's bad to fund, so give 20, over the last year we've given like 20 different grants to a smattering of things. Like some is education, some is people building products, some is matching funding, some is community building. And then the idea is do 20 different things and then get the community to do some evaluation. So we'd like to do decentralized evaluation. You can have a few people do an evaluation if you allocate or delegate the power to them, and then learn from that and then improve on it the next 20 grants. And I think Optimism Retro PGF will have to do that. I think Protocol Guild will, if it desires. There's a big benefit to keep it very simple, right? But you could always add more optimization and evaluation to any project. And so as we get better, there's decentralized evaluation tools like Coordinate. We need more good decentralized evaluation tools, and then you can add on centralized evaluation tools, and then we can optimize all the systems, and then we can improve. But yes, DAOs will waste extra fluff of money in the meantime, but we can't just not give out money because it's not optimized perfectly.
But see, what tends to happen, though, is we get into this, we have this enthusiasm to start with, and they're like, oh my God, we're going to fund all of this. And then there is a problem with what gets funded or the process in which that happens and so on, and then there's a pullback. And this is the pattern that we've seen for the past, 3 years? It's like, yeah, oh shit.
This is much harder than we expected.
Oh my God. Cut it all. Stop doing it. And dare I say, public goods is always at the bottom. That's the first to go. It's like in the pandemic when artists were just like, nope, we're not going to pay you. You don't add any value. So it's how do we solve for that? The big enthusiasm and the big shutdown or pullback in terms of funding public goods. Like, what's the solution? Is it optimization? Is it simpler ways of evaluating?
I think Trent kind of, this is my maybe spicy take, I don't know, I think Trent kind of hit the nail on the head when he suggested that it's a small trusted group of people. What it's something on the order of 150 people in Protocol Guild, right? That's not, I mean, maybe it is a coincidence, I don't know, but Dunbar's number exists for a reason. You can operate in a group of 100 people and know one another and trust one another. I don't know how many people are being funded through RPGF or how many organizations. I suspect it's a much higher number. So maybe the answer here is to hive things off into smaller trusted groups and find a responsible person, to manage the funding for that group. That's just one thought.
Yeah, specialties in evaluation is good. I agree. If you're a badge holder in the Optimism thing and you have to look at 1,000 different projects and evaluate them and then decide how to divide up in percentages. Last night we were saying you could probably use a chat like GPT to come up with a good estimate of
that's
roughly
the answer. Just GPT it all.
Right?
All right, panel's over. We solved it.
That's going to be the average. So the average of these 100 badge holders, I think I could guess what it will come out to roughly. But then you're going to miss a lot of actually valuable things that people didn't really know. They don't have the expertise for. And so our idea, I came up with the idea last night that we have another committee of maybe 5 experts like Vitalik and Juan Benet and Simona and a handful of others that have a separate pot of money or part of the money and strike force to fund things that got missed in the average badge holder allocations. And so you could protect against the averageness of how DAOs decide on things by having Steve Jobs like thinkers fund other like on the edge things, and so those don't get missed.
But they have, that is the most biased way to do it, because those people are already, the minute, you know, if Vitalik went and tweeted right now, like he likes sandwiches, like fucking everyone would start buying sandwiches.
There would be a sandwich,
You know what I mean?
sandwich coin.
Sandwich DAO.
Yeah, there would be sandwich DAO in like 5 minutes. Like using them as the like general case, I think is incorrect. I think if you break down, you just need to break down by categories and just literally hire the experts for that to do it. You know, why isn't Richard Moore the one that's going and saying what is good JavaScript dev tooling that we have to fund, and just pay the guy so he doesn't have to participate in a retro PGF? Just pay him. Like, you're already going to give him the 20K, 30K from it. Just give it to him up front and tell him like coordinate JavaScript dev tooling.
Yeah, like I'd love for there to be. Yeah, I'd love for there to be ways where you can reduce the overhead, because right now it's okay. So Gitcoin and Optimism rounds, they are attention games, because you have projects with similar profiles who are in some sense competing for the same pot of money. For better or worse, like if there wasn't this competition, you would end up with people just siphoning it off, right? There has to be a limited set of funds available for people to claim from. That's like the fundamental starting point. But ideally, what you do is you reduce the overhead that each project has to do in participating in these quarterly or rounds that occur twice a year. You reduce the overhead by not expecting them to advocate for the project consistently, having to go through new infrastructure every single time. This is something that's been an issue for some Gitcoin participants, where they're changing the sequence. I know they're adjusting their model. Again, I support all experiments, but this is a real challenge for grantees that are going through these processes. Is that the overhead to receive funding? It changes every time, and it's recurring. There's some slight benefit, but the more that you can reduce this, the better it is for people who are actually doing the work that they want to be doing, and they don't want to be applying to grants rounds, right? You shouldn't have to spend a significant % of your time, or ideally you shouldn't have to dedicate so much of your time to actually appearing legible to these funding mechanisms. And so, again, I will show Protocol Guild. It's a collective which brings together this large number of people which are working in the same domain, and makes itself hopefully a little bit more legible to the scale of funding which RPGF is hoping to offer. So instead of having 20 different profiles with unclear relationships to each other and different ways of surfacing their contributions, you can group together into one single organization and say, look, we'll do all the distribution for you, we'll do the allocation. This represents a pretty good chunk of all the Ethereum Core Protocol contributors, and in that way, you've removed 95% of the duplicate overhead that all of these projects would have to go through in order to actually surface themselves to the mechanism. And so it's the same thing. I would love for there to be a developer tooling guild that can surface.
I don't think that can work, though.
Okay, how's that?
I think Protocol Guild is extremely unique because of the high. But no, like I think it's because to be a protocol developer, there's a super high barrier to entry. Meaning, once you get in it, you're in it for the next like 2 to 3 years typically, or you churn out within about 6 months. And so, but like with developer tooling or whatever else exists,
definitely
like,
not the same model
I
for
just
sure.
yeah.
But ways that, like you said, Richard Moore, he should probably be maybe he is a badge holder. I don't know, but it would be great if. If there was a way to weight his opinion a little bit more when it comes to things that are directly related to his domain expertise.
I don't understand why Optimism hasn't just made sub-DAOs and just allocates budgets.
Isn't that exactly what I said a moment ago?
Yeah.
Like hive things off into small.
Yeah. I'm this is something also I have like a big problem with like the Web3 community, is that there's some things that like the corporate world has done really well that we need to like respect and say like we can use that and these structures and systems to like make our lives easier, and like delegating out and creating like sub-organizations in a larger organization actually works, and a flat system is absolute chaos. This is the third round of Retro PGF I've been a part of. The first round I thought was psychotic with 165 projects, and I only knew 20. And I spent so much time researching and just gave up halfway through and just asked somebody who knew the rest of the projects what their thoughts were, and that's how I allocated the budget because I literally couldn't. It doesn't scale.
And that's as an iteration or an improvement on that, there is this attempt to create an evaluation system. But again, because there's so many variables and so much information, there is also a certain degree of paralysis in terms of action, because you're like, what? And also, this will take so long for me to process, and also maybe I don't even feel like I'm prepared to assess some of them, because I'm number one, time, number two, expertise, number three, how do you actually quantify how much? How do you decide how much? But to your point, you ask somebody, so one of the things that they're implementing now is lists, right? So you make a list, I go, oh, Greg knows some shit about coding, right? So I'm gonna go, oh, Greg probably knows these guys, and that's what he goes by, which is something that happened in Gitcoin as well. But at that point, there is the risk that you absolutely stop evaluating anything and just copy paste, which is what happens.
I'm highly convinced this round's going to be a complete failure, and we're going to see 20 projects take all the money, and a bunch of real projects that probably needed funding are just not going to get it.
But this is
There's too many projects.
This is what happened with Gitcoin, right? To Trent's point, it's a popularity contest. So a lot of people don't know how to shill themselves, and then
Especially developers, by the way. We're really bad at shilling ourselves.
100%. So you would go to page, 10 of Gitcoin grants, and you would have these really powerful local groups that are doing education, that are doing really interesting stuff, and then they'd be $5.
I can think of 3 or 4 or 5 of these without thinking too
Right.
hard. Yeah, that deserve way more.
So what do we do? Oh my God,
So do you
1 minute to solve it.
once the round is done, do you think that you and a handful of people could look at the whole thing and kind of pick the ones that got missed that actually need funding? Do you think do you know people that could do that?
I can't. I've tried going through that list. I have no idea what any of those are, and I do not have time to click 1,000 websites. That's probably 2 to 5 minutes a company. It's already absurd. They're gonna get missed. Yeah. If you're not in the first 100, I guarantee you, and a quick scroll, oh, I know that name, it's over. You're done.
So use the community maybe you need some mechanism to figure out the ones that were missed. That's an important thing, right? And so that's what needs to be figured out, I think.
You've
As
got,
a final,
a week.
a final thought, and I think it's sort of related to all of this discussion so far, is generally I think it would be really helpful to start bucketing things by dependency or fundamental importance, because maybe it's controversial, but some things are more public and more good than others, and all of these processes are trying to get to some idealized same end state, but they're using different mechanisms and different processes to get there. But I do think the more you segment or have very clear, explicit buckets of which projects go where, it becomes much easier to make these evaluations, or if you're doing a pairwise comparison between different projects, this is when you'll start to see it might make the job a little bit easier. But I think generally we shouldn't be afraid about being more explicit about what public this is actually benefiting, and maybe even more if we're thinking about terms and what terms are useful, I would encourage people to look up common goods, because I think this is much more descriptive about what we're actually building. Public goods are typically abstract concepts, sometimes roads, but common goods is what we're building in the digital space. And so I would really, as my last shill, encourage people to check out common goods and understand which commons these things are being built for and at which level of the commons, because some of these depend on lower levels, and I think those are the ones that should probably get most of the focus here.
If I can add one last thing, yeah. We also didn't address that the the Optimism PGF round is supposed to be projects that are basically benefiting Optimism. So they're not just general public goods. So I don't even know if like Protocol Guilds fits into that category. Does that benefit Optimism? And so what I like that ENS DAO is doing is they have ENS ecosystem grants, but now they are also applying a funding general public goods. And I think that other projects, including Optimism, will or should also take that approach.
Okay. Greg, no final thought? No.
I'll echo something Greg said earlier. I want to amplify it, which is like, I think we should not be shy about taking ideas from the evil, corporate world. Like, the VC model is one model. It's very imperfect, but like, it works well for funding certain types of things. I think I personally would be very excited to see really thoughtful research into models that exist prior to or outside of Web3 that we can learn from.
That's a very good point, and I think, this all or nothing dynamic that we have, like we must change everything because everything is shit, might be like not the optimum thing, and if we are bringing things into, from Web 2, it shouldn't be KPIs and OKRs and marketing and shit like that, which is disturbing, but maybe looking at these systems that can make it a little bit easier to deal with the micro so we can get to the big PG macro. Well, that was it.
Speaking of KPIs,
Stop! No.
impact is a red herring. You can't evaluate impact on the granular level. You can't evaluate which GitHub commit was more important than the other ones. Don't get sucked into that trap.
Yeah, I second that.
That's the last thing I have to say.
Yeah.
Cool.
Good point.
Thanks, everyone. Thank you.